What's up, everybody? This is Adam from AdMine Analytics, and you're listening to the AdMine Analytics podcast. More people than ever are trying to tie all their marketing data together in a way that helps them actually move the needle for performance. Why do I say actually? Well, because more often than not, tech tools are overpromised, marketing teams are understaffed, and the data just keeps pouring in, which all lead to marketing analytics data that's just not quite helpful enough. On this show, our founder and I discuss all things marketing analytics to help you navigate those complicated waters so you can measure the impact of your marketing and use that data to push your business to the next level. All right, welcome back to another episode of the AdMine Analytics podcast. We're glad you're here with us. Today, we're going to talk about the different ways that you can approach reporting. And as an analytics consultancy, we deal with companies all the time that have a lot of different goals and things that they want out of their reporting. And so, Mike, give me a little bit of a flavor of kind of what your thoughts are. You've been doing this the longest here. You've heard the most variety of sort of desired outcomes from reporting. As you've distilled this over time, walk me through kind of how you've come to where you are now and what your view on it is.
Well, one of the things that we have the benefit of here is the marketing teams that we work with think about how to build a useful set of reports. They think about the way their humans interact with their data. They think about that when it happens and probably not too much outside of that. And that's great because most of the time that they should be spending is marketing. We have the fortunate opportunity from our perspective of thinking about that all the time. What happens when humans go to work with data and what they're trying to get out of it in order to fulfill their job functions. So we just have the benefit of spending, 20 people's time all day, every day, thinking about those sorts of problems and how to optimize the human connection to the data.
Yeah. So I myself, my background obviously was not in engineering or the data engineering side, but more on that marketing side. And so I've been in that marketing seat. And since being here at AdMind, the kind of analogy that I would give to it is, you're going to sit down to eat a 5-course meal, and I give you one utensil. And it could be any one, but you only get one utensil to consume this food with. So like, at one company, we might, I'm just giving you a spoon. It's like, could you use a spoon to consume soup and salad and steak and potatoes and, whatever other dish you might have and dessert? Yeah, you could. And, at another spot, you might just get the little fork that you use to take the crab meat out of the crab legs, the little mini fork. And could you eat a whole meal with that? Could you eat soup with that? Yeah, you could, but it's going to be frustrating. And you're going to think to yourself, there's got to be better ways of doing this. But as soon as you're done with the soup and you set that little teeny fork down, you're kind of going to go on to the next thing until that pain point comes back around. And that's what you were just talking about, is that pain point for our brands that we work with doesn't come around as often as it does with us, because we're the ones tasked with coming up with the utensils that you're going to use to consume your marketing meal with. And so my thought has always been, as we've talked about this, that it is really, I'm going to use the word unburdening, because I feel like marketers get really frustrated trying to use that same fork for all the different reasons that they might be asked to come up with information. And when you realize that, like, hey, there's also a spoon and a knife and other things that you can use, other contexts for understanding this data, it becomes, there's simultaneously I've got to build some additional reports, but also clarity of mind, clarity of understanding what you're going to use that data for and when you're going to use it. And then that empowers you to be better with it. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes sense to me a ton. And it feels like, so what we're going to spend some time talking about today is that the reports that you use when humans go to connect with data, the context around that matters a lot. So to extend your analogy a little bit, when you go, it's you need more than one utensil. There's more than one context to taking food off plate and getting food in mouth. And so that, if you understand those contexts, then it helps you build a set of utensils. And it's not a large set, but it's just more than the fork, and it's more than
Yeah.
I think if you were to say, for most mid-market companies, for most people who are SaaS companies that are funded and trying to grow their marketing, or e-commerce companies who've found product market fit and are doing tens or 15s or 20s or hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue annually, most companies fit in the scenario where they have marketing spork. And it's like, it kind of works for most, for some of those contexts, but sometimes when you go to use marketing spork to cut steak, it's like you're creating friction in the organization that's unnecessary. And if you can be a little bit more thoughtful about that scenario, then you can get some purpose-built functions so that when human goes to connect with data, it's like, I can get what I want and I can find it quickly and easy. And I'm looking for insights, things that I don't know that I can act on to change performance in my job function. I get those things quick and I get on with my job. And
Nice.
so that's what we're going to talk about today, is some of those contexts.
Right. And I would challenge, there's 4. We're drawing a line in the sand. There are 4 contexts for this audience. Prove me wrong that there's more than 4. There's definitely more than 1, and there's not more than like 6, 7, maybe. Like, these 4 are it, and any other ones, my challenge is that like they probably fit under one of these 4 that we've identified in some form or fashion. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to go over the 4. I'm going to outline them right now, and then we're going to get into each one. And what I want to make sure to remind us to talk about is that as we dive deeper into each one, we're going to talk about what are the circumstances under which you perform this function. What arises, what comes to you, the marketer, that says, now I need to do this type of reporting. And then our takeaway for you is, okay, and so what? Like, what are you going to do to arm yourself to get better at being able to handle these things? What's the takeaway for that particular reporting context?
Yeah.
So the 4 are,
can I give you one?
KPI monitor.
Can I give you one before you jump into it? One other thought here. So we really like the Clayton Christensen model of jobs to be done. And we would call these the 4 jobs of marketing data. And in the context of jobs, a job is the desired progress that a person is trying to make. And so you'll see that these contexts, as we go through the 4 of them, it's like there are things that come up in a period in time. You do the job and then you complete the job. And so they're not, they happen repeatedly over time, but it's not this generic just cloud of stuff. It's like you have a specific task you're trying to accomplish. There's a start, there's an end, and that happens repeatedly in the same way over time. That's what defines a job to be done. And then you can start to measure how well those jobs are getting accomplished. So as we think about building reporting and deploying reporting in organizations to accomplish those jobs, it's important to see what the start, the end is, and what the definition of successfully complete is. So we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into it.
It's what is the job to be done? And the answer is not give reporting, right? Like that's that vague general thing that gets you into trouble. There is a specific job behind what questions you're getting. And what we want to make sure is that you're equipped to answer and respond to that specific job.
Oh man, and one more thought on that too. So the purpose of marketing analytics is to produce insights, and we talked about that, but it's things you don't know that you can act on to improve performance. And that's not the job. That's an outcome North Star metric, but the way you're going to get an insight changes. So a good Clayton Christensen job to be done example is not eat food, because that happens in so many different circumstances. But make breakfast burrito is a very specific circumstance in which you're going to eat food. So that's a general thing. The general thing is insights. But there are 3 or 4, and I think it's 4. There's 4 specific circumstances, specific jobs that are done with the ultimate goal of getting insights, but with a very specific start and end.
Awesome. Okay, let's intro the 4. So we've got KPI monitoring. We've got reporting to stakeholders. We've got, oh man, I'm gonna have to cut that out. Okay, I did it in the wrong order. All right, let's introduce the 4. So we've got KPI monitoring. We've got ad hoc analysis, reporting to stakeholders, and strategic planning. And so those are the 4. We're going to get into each one of them right now. And the question that we're going to start off, so we're going to go back to KPI monitoring. So we're going to describe this a little bit. We're going to start with what is the job to be done here. So when we are monitoring for KPIs, what are we trying to do, Mike?
Well, I like to think, like, imagine the scenario where you're looking for a trend. You're looking for, are we pacing correctly? That sometimes, for most marketing teams, that happens on about a weekly basis. Sometimes there's high performance, high data groups that are looking at things on a daily basis. And I think that there's a different job that we'll get into that happens less frequently than that. That's maybe at the monthly or quarterly sort of scenario, and we'll get into that one. But this KPI monitoring job is about, if you're the director of marketing, it's about making sure that you know your numbers, that they're on track. And then the people that report to you, either your teammates or the vendors that are working on you, that you know their numbers and whether those things are on track. So the start is determine, the definition of the job is determine whether we're on track. And if we're not on track, so the answer may be yes, and then we're done with the job. Or it may be no, and there's a specific couple of areas where we're not on track. We may not know the answers to those things. That kicks off another job we'll talk about. That kicks off the ad hoc analysis job. But the job of determining whether your KPIs are on track or not is yes or no. And if no, which ones are off track?
So one of the things when we talk about this that I like is it's the easiest way for me to understand this, the KPI monitoring, is what you said at the beginning there, where if I'm in the director marketing seat, it's what KPIs are most important to me that indicate that we are doing well at thing. But I want to know how well I'm doing with some regularity. And to your point, like if you're spending $1 million a day on some campaign, you might be looking at that every hour, every minute. I've been in positions where I had regular analysis like about every hour to make sure the flow of what we were acquiring was coming in the right way. But it's that I'm wanting to make sure that the things that are under my purview are happening regularly and according to what I think should be the norm. So
let's talk about when it happens.
Yeah,
like a little bit. So like a lot of times this is, if you're running a really like well organized team, maybe you're holding a weekly huddle or a weekly pulse meeting. If you use traction or if you use scaling up, there's different names for these sorts of meetings. But you're holding a meeting probably on a weekly cadence where you're just checking in. You're saying, all right, Adam, you're the PPC guy. How's our spend doing? Are we trending right for the monthly spend? How's our clicks doing? Are we trending right for the monthly clicks? How's our cost per conversion doing? Are we trending right for the cost per conversion this month so far? And if the answer is no to that question, and I'm the director of marketing, I'm going like, I hope you kind of know what's going on. And if not, then what we're finding out when we look at the data here together, when we're looking at KPI monitoring, I hope that we're finding out, okay, we don't know what's going on. Our cost per conversion is super high. Something funky is going on. And so, Adam, you now very explicitly have a task. You're going to go figure out what's going on with our PPC cost per conversion. But that's one scenario where this happens if you're a well-organized team. Sometimes this happens when you're working with your vendors and like at not maybe everybody in the same room at the same time doing that. It might be like I go to my weekly or my bi-weekly PPC call. My agency says, here's what we're working on. And if that call's held really well, then that agency is super accountable to metrics. And that's how the call starts. They say, here's the numbers, here's where we spend, here's where we're trending at, here's where we're off, and here's what we're doing about it. And but those are usually the context, either report bringing it to me, a direct report bringing it to me, or me holding a weekly or bi-weekly pulse meeting and saying, all right, what are we scoring? What are we scoring? What are we scoring? And those numbers are pretty much, if we're doing this well, disciplined as a team, those numbers are pretty static over time. They don't change. It's not like one day I'm going, what's the cost per click? And the next day I'm going, what's our impression share? It's like, we have a pretty consistent set of numbers that we're monitoring, and they may change next quarter. They might change based on our strategic initiatives that change, but week over week over week, those are probably pretty similar numbers.
So you know that you were doing, yeah, and you know that you were doing this well. If what?
Okay.
If yeah.
So this is, and I'm going to answer this from the question of the data. Like if you have a human to data connection that does this well, you have a report that's automatically populated for you. So you don't have a bunch of rigmarole trying to get the numbers ready every time before you
You're
look
not
at
pulling
it.
data and organizing it in a VLOOKUP
Yep.
table for
Yep.
consumption.
And it's got to be consistent so that those manual processes can work and they're okay, but they can be error prone. And then if somebody's sick, then all of a sudden you don't have your scorecard or whatever. So you need something that if you're doing this really well, you've got A grades in this area. You have something that's regularly up, it shows you trend over the recent period of time. So depending on the way you're disciplined in looking at metrics, a lot of times people will say it needs to show us week by week for the last 13 weeks or trend period over period that's this week compared to the last 4 or 5 weeks. So these numbers, there's usually the amount of different metrics and slices you have on something like this is you may have 7, 10, 15 is starting to get to be a lot of numbers to monitor. And then you probably slice those things by 2 or 3 ways. It's probably not 15 or 20 different ways to slice these things that you're reporting on. That means that you have a combination of numbers that's something like 25, 30, 40, 50 between the slices, the max number of slices and max number of numbers you're looking at. If you have 200 slices and 200 metrics, then you don't have something that you can actually even consume as a group. So the amount of numbers that you're looking at matters. And then one of the most important things in this reporting experience is if those numbers are on track, if you're spending what you think you're supposed to be spending and it's on trend, then you don't need to think about anything else with that number. You need to be thinking about in your discussion time the things that are off trend, either high or low, the things that are not doing what you expect. So your human to data reporting interface should call those things out. It should make those big and obvious. This thing is not the same as it was the last 3 or 4 weeks. This thing is not the same as it was the last, 6 weeks or something like that. So an A grade here has a set of numbers that's like in the 20s that you're looking at max. It's automatically available for you because the numbers that you pull are the same week over week over week. It has highlights that show what's different compared to the previous performance. And I didn't mention this, but in an ideal circumstance, you have one person who's responsible for those numbers. And that's more of a management thing than it is human to data connection. But you say Adam's number is PPC spend. Greg's number over here, his number is organic visits to the website. And so those are each person has a specific
those someone.
KPIs are owned.
Yeah, great.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I'm wondering whether or not it would be like in a quick way, quick answer to this, what makes KPI monitoring, all those great things that you just talked about, what makes it bad for doing ad hoc analysis, which is the next one we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So if you're trying to use a KPI monitoring dashboard for ad hoc analysis, you're going to wish in ad hoc analysis, we'll talk about this, but you're going to want to be able to slice the data in every way possible. And so if you're using an ad hoc analysis dashboard while you're trying to do KPI monitoring, you're going to have 200, 300, 400 different numbers that you could look at. And so it's either when you like want a specific set of filtering to apply when you're doing KPI monitoring, but you have to set up the dashboard every time to get the right set of filters and the right conditions in it. If you have to do configuration when you go to hold your weekly team huddle or when your PPC team reports to you, if you have to reconfigure the report every time, that's error prone. And it means that you're probably not tracking, that you may be not disciplined enough in tracking the same things period over period over period. So if it's too flexible, then it's time wasty. And worse than anything, you lose when you're meeting and trying to just say, Adam, are you on track? Greg, are you on track? When those turn into 15-minute discussions, then you're not being able to hold the right amount of accountability across the team. Right. And so you're losing, somebody else is not being held accountable.
Okay. Follow up then, what makes KPI monitoring dashboard bad for reporting to stakeholders?
All right. So that's a super good question too. So you care when I'm sitting here and I'm director of marketing, you're my PPC guy, and I got my organic guy. We probably care about the things that we monitor weekly at a pretty granular level. Our stakeholders maybe want to know, but if they want to know that, it has more to do with us telling them the appropriate stories or them not trusting us. And there's a dynamic in the organization between the delegation of responsibilities that's an issue. But we probably care about that 20 to 30 sets of numbers, and we probably care about the cost per click and the impressions and the impression share and the spends and the conversion rates. Our stakeholders probably care about the spends and the conversions. And that's probably, and when we look at channels in our little team group, we're probably going like, how's email retargeting versus email prospecting? How's video versus like video retargeting versus like video discovery sort of stuff? Our stakeholders don't care about that sort of stuff. And so we shouldn't give them way too much and way too much flexibility to slice the data. They probably need 4 or 5 metrics and 1 or 2 slices.
Yeah, this is a pro tip for all you young marketers out there. I think there's always a tendency to feel like you're adding value to the company and you do all of these cool things, and you make a mistake when you try and communicate all that granularity up to the people you report to as a means of showing the kind of value or things that you're doing, because you're just introducing future questions that you're not necessarily going to want to be able to answer with all the regularity. That, I think there's a level of maturity in the digital marketer who says, I know what my individual numbers are and what things I'm doing that are cool, but I also know what my CFO or CEO want to hear about. And so I'm just going to tell them the things they want to hear about and not try and like over communicate all the little nuanced stuff, no matter how exciting you might think that it is.
Well, and you need to, and sometimes the executive, and speaking for myself here, needs to be trained on what they need to know about it. It's not about hiding information. It's like what you want to do to create workflows in your organization that are efficient is, in our little team meeting, it's okay for us to go look at a data point this week and go, oh my gosh, wow, cost per conversion is up and we don't know explicitly why. I'm hoping that most of the time my PPC guy does know that, but when we find it out and we don't know about it, it's like, all right, well, now we have a task. It's not like this guy's on the hot seat and he should be fired. It's like, we just have this week, we don't know, we need to go figure out, we need to get reported back to. When we report up to our stakeholders, so the amount of unknown that's acceptable for us in our like weekly pulse and accountability is like 50% of the time there's going to be something that shows up there and we don't know what's caused it, and we need to go take action and investigate. When we report up to our stakeholders, there should be 0 unknown. It should be, here's what's happened, here's what we've done, here's what we've learned, here's what we're trying next. So if we give them the ad hoc analysis, if we give them the scorecard reporting tool or the KPI monitoring tool, and 50% of the time when they log in and look at that thing, and they, especially if they do it without us there, they find things that they can't explain, that's going to create questions for them. They have to come down and interrupt whatever activities we're currently trying to work on to make strategic progress to go answer those questions. That's organizational inefficiency. If we can feed them the right amount of data at the right time to prove accountability to us, not to hide from them, but just to prove our progress, then that means that we can spend uninterrupted time working on our strategic activities in blocks, rather than getting, somebody shows up and goes, oh, hold on a second. Our cost per conversion this week is up a little bit more. Like that's the stuff where we lose time.
You shoot yourself in the foot because they come back and then you feel like they don't trust you, but it's like, well, you gave them this thing that didn't tell the whole story and now they're curious about it and now you feel like you're on your heels, but it's really because you probably shouldn't have reported all of that up to in the first place.
Yeah. Or you should have done it with a story at least. At least you should have given it the context, because they don't have the time to go do the investigation that we're responsible for doing.
Right. Okay. Ad hoc analysis. Let's talk about the job to be done here. So what causes you as the reporting person, what causes you to go and have to do ad hoc analysis?
I think we've kind of hinted at this already. So the beginning of ad hoc analysis is a question that you don't have an answer to. The end of it is answering the question. So, and I'm interested to hear how you've seen this before, but to us, when you look at ad hoc analysis, it's about having, when you're doing ad hoc analysis, it's about having a super flexible way to interface with your data, because those questions are things that are like, what page has had the best conversion rate in the last 3 months? Or we find out in our weekly pulse, like a specific, PPCs, our non-branded PPC conversion rate is down. Why? And you have to, well, like, okay, I need to go be able to slice it by geo. I need to be slice it by campaign. I need to be able to slice it by ad copy. I need to be able to slice it by which conversion of all conversions we might be talking about, which products, which offers, like which types of forms are we talking about for conversion. So you need to be able to slice the data in any way that the data can be sliced to do that job. The measure of success of a useful ad hoc analysis interface is the amount of time it takes from question to answer. If that's measured in days or weeks, then you don't have an acceptable, usable ad hoc analysis experience. If you have to go write code, if you have to write SQL to answer one of these questions, that happens sometimes when you get a crazy, wild question. But if that happens regularly, you don't have an acceptable ad hoc analysis interface. It means you aren't able to be the answerer of your own question. If that's happening, you've got inefficiency in your organization, you've got inefficiency in your progress.
I would think that my experience has been the companies that I've always worked for have not had very mature data analytics capabilities. And so my brain is the system for ad hoc analysis, where it's like, I have this question and I'm the one who has the background and context of understanding the different factors that would go into this particular, why is this conversion rate down? You go, okay, well, I know I've got landing pages. I know I've got traffic that's coming into that. I know I've got lead forms. I know I've got a history of time where we were advertising in particular geographies. Like, that information, it exists in my brain. And so now it's a matter of going through and like solving that puzzle. And how much of it exists in your brain versus how much of it exists in different data systems is sort of you're getting more mature with where your marketing analytics is. But my personal experience has always been that by the time you have an answer to that question, it's moot, because enough time has passed that you're like on to the next thing.
What would you guess the average time is from question to answer? Just
I think
knowing that some of them are instantaneous and some of them are long. What would you guess the average is?
Days to a week worth of time for you to, and that can be like, what other priorities does the company have that you're maybe working on?
Yeah.
And so the answer to that particular question might be more of a priority or less of a priority based on other things. It might be more or less of a priority based on who asked it.
Yeah.
If it's like, and that's a company culture thing. Like, sometimes you get company cultures that think that the CEO's question is now the number one thing we have to answer. And it's like, that's very rarely the actual case. Sometimes it is, but sometimes that's more of just like, they were curious about something. We don't need to stop all of our marketing priorities to put together some presentation just because this person who asked it, we call it the hippo, which is the highest paid person in the organization. It's the hippo question, and hippo questions shouldn't out prioritize the things that you're working on as an org. But if they do, that again, that's kind of a culture question there. But I'm curious, like what? Yeah, go ahead.
We did some interviews of our target market, and some of them coming from our customer base a year and a half ago. And one of the average answer to that question, how long does it take, was one of my favorite quotes was, well, sometimes 15 minutes, but usually not. Sometimes a couple days, and then like most of the time weeks till never. Like in those being able to answer a question. And one of my favorite responses to that was a marketer, shout out to Kizik Shoes, a marketer that said, I measure the success of my organization on how fast we can turn around those answers. And if we're operating the way we should be, every single question should be answerable in 24 hours. Most of the time, those are answerable in minutes as we work in an interface. So
yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right, and then we've talked about this before in the context of the KPI reporting, but it should be pretty clear as like what makes ad hoc analysis bad for stakeholder reporting is like just the sheer unorganized fashion of it. And what makes it bad for KPI monitoring is, again, there's just not organization around, there's no consistency, there's not like a underlying set of principles for why you're doing this. It's random questions coming to you as opposed to you wanting to monitor the things that you're interested in and care about. Any thoughts on that?
No, yeah, maybe one or two. So I think that when you have the scenario that so think about this. If you were to do all of your reporting by giving your CEO or your CMO access to the Google Analytics interface or the Google Ads interface, it's like, just go answer your own questions there. Like,
Yes.
that you have a hard time answering your questions in those interfaces, and you work in them regularly, probably. So your CMO or your CEO is probably not going to have the same level of experience there. And so even if not that they're dumb, but they just don't have as much working experience. And so the likelihood that because there's so much flexibility, the likelihood you pull the data in the same way to get to the same answer is almost zero. And the likelihood that they have the context for like, oh, we apply this filter because in this date range, this one thing happened. And so we do this. And then last week, we launched a new campaign and it wasn't named correctly. So we got to filter that thing out. Like they don't have any of that context. So the way they pull the data is going to be not the same as the way you pull the data. Now, the point that I was going to make is it's your responsibility. You have to earn the right by reporting accurately over time to have them not have to go, I need to second guess you. I want to go look in that interface. That's a give and take thing. CEO, CMO, VP of marketing needs to be able to delegate. Speaking from some of those seats, like that's a hard thing to figure out how to do, but you have to earn the respect and the right to not be questioned at every time something comes up. You have to give good answers over time and accurate answers over time so that you're not causing suspicion because you're giving inaccurate or inappropriate answers to questions.
Those numbers sound sus. That's not what you want.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about reporting to stakeholders. So this is the third one. So what is the job to be done here? What initiates reporting to stakeholders? Although it sounds pretty self-explanatory.
Well, it is. But in different organizations, the discipline is a little different. So sometimes in the less ideal circumstance, this happens because CEO jumps into your office with his hair on fire and now you have to report to him. And that's hard. More often it's about a regular cadence. We have a monthly readout. We have a quarterly report where we have to describe progress to the board. And so it usually happens based on some sort of accountability cadence within your organization. We report up once a week, and that's often. Once a month is common-ish. And then quarterly, there's usually some sort of a reporting. So that's the context. And it's the start and the finish are prepare report, deliver report up. And so you're doing other insight-oriented things with the data, but this job is done when you deliver the reporting up to the stakeholders. They may come back with questions. It may send you off into ad hoc analysis world again, but your job is done when you present it up. Now, it's done best. The quality of this job has to do with how long it takes you to do that preparation. So if you have to pull 40 reports manually every month to do this thing, and you have to start on next month's, the day after you reported your last one to be ready in time, then you're not doing this job very successfully. Also, this requires explanations in the data. The amount of unknown that you present in that data is zero. You may have questions you don't have an answer to, but you know that you don't have an answer to. You may say, we have a continuing persistent issue with our branded impression share. Our competition just seems to be crazy about bidding on our own terms. And so we don't know, we're still trying to navigate what to do about that. But there's a story there. You present that information and say, here, one of our key concerns is X, Y, or Z. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's what we've tried. Here's what's worked. Here's what hasn't worked. And so the presentation of this data is very prepared. It's numbers, and they're cross-validated and double-checked, and the amount of explanation is everything is explained here. And it's not very granular. Usually, like, there's a set of numbers that are important that you report on over time, and that number we talked about earlier, that may be 5, 10, 12 maybe, but in that range, 5s, 10s. And the explanations for what's happened in those numbers since the last time you reported are comprehensive. And so when you're doing it well, it takes a day to prepare, and you're using, and you have notes about what's your strategic activities, what's happened, what's not. And when you deliver it, it's delivered and it's received. And the amount of unexplained, the amount of questions that you get back about, like, hey, these things don't line up and this story didn't make any sense, that if that number is a small, 0 to small, then this job is done well.
Yeah. As you were talking, I'm thinking about like times where that has been a smooth process and times where it has not been a smooth process, and like what made it smooth and what made it not. And I think it's smooth when there's agreement and alignment on the job to be done between you as the digital marketing person and the people that you're reporting up to. That there's consensus around, these are the numbers we're going to report on. If you have questions about these outside of these things, here's how you can ask and get questions answered to that. Those to me, those are all healthy things. And shout out to Listen Tech, which had a super, when I was there, had a super buttoned up. When I got there, this was already established. It was money spent and then results obtained, and some storytelling around that. Where it gets squirrely is when you, the digital marketer, can introduce some squirreliness. Again, I talked about this before, but if you think there's a need in your storytelling to introduce all these other things levers you've been pulling on and things that worked or whatever, you think you're doing yourself a favor. What ends up happening is, in the executive's mind, oftentimes they just interpret that as something you can regularly report on. And you might have spent hours putting some of those nuanced things together as part of your storytelling without the intention of like being held regularly accountable for those things. Those are like reporting anecdotes that you have now inadvertently canonized as being part of this reporting up to stakeholders thing. So that when you get into that world, it starts getting a little squirrely. For you executives out there, it also gets squirrely when you make the assumption that a random question that you asked in a meeting that took 2 or 3 days or maybe a week to get an answer to should now be on demand Q&A kind of stuff. Now, you might have a reason for why it needs to be, but again, this goes back to, there should be alignment between the executive team and the team reporting in about what these reporting to stakeholders, where it starts, where it ends, and if it's outside of that, we have a process for like asking and answering those questions. And if you can maintain that meeting hygiene, then I think you'll be in a good spot.
Yeah, we're getting into like management consulting here a little bit when you're thinking about who owns which numbers and for which purposes. But one of the ways that this gets off track sometimes is some of those numbers do change a little over time, and it may be important. You may go, you know what, we do have one of our biggest threats right now in a threat analysis is that we have people who are trying to take over that are trying to stamp on our brand space, people that are trying to encroach on our product names or whatever, like something like that. And so maybe for a period of time, you do need to report on something like your branded search impression share. That may raise to an executive level for a period of time. Where you run into a hygiene problem is where that temporary number that you need to report on for a quarter gets stuck in a report that you report on for the next 3 years, and it doesn't matter anymore. And now it's like this snowball rolling downhill where it picks up a little branch and another little branch and another little thing, and now you have an executive report that's got all these little branches and dots and leaves and all that stuff, and it's like, we don't need most of those things to judge our current initiatives, yet they're on there. They create questions, they create motion, and they create no progress.
Yeah, and if at any time you're in there and an answer to your question is related to where you're not confident that the data is accurate, your branch is about to fall off that tree, man. Like
Yeah.
your relationship with the executive team when the data is inaccurate and that becomes part of your storytelling, you've definitely got those are red flags that
Yeah.
things are about to go sideways fast.
Yep.
So, okay. Real quick, all the reporting to what makes that reporting to stakeholders, it's bad to do ad hoc analysis on that again because it's designed to be limited in what you're viewing. The numbers that you're
And it's
viewing, the
designed to be
dimensions,
explained. It's
right?
designed to, you don't want unknowns in there. You want things that we've done and explanations for them.
And why the reporting to stakeholders would be bad for KPI monitoring has to do with the level of granularity. You're just trying to be more concise with your reporting to stakeholders about what really matters to the business at that level for that kind of meeting, where drilling down into the individual responsibility KPIs is all well and good, but that's meant more for your individual team. And there's
Yeah.
been times where I've said to a CEO, like, they're asking about what goes into cost per this and that. And I've said to them, like, you're more than welcome to join us in our meeting that we have every 2 weeks or whatever on this day. I'd love to have you in there to hear us talk more about these things. And that was well received. Kudos to that CEO. But that's kind of the difference between reporting to stakeholders and your own KPI monitoring is the level of granularity in the numbers that you're looking at. Cool. Let's round it out. Let's talk about strategic planning. So we intentionally left this one until the end because it's a little bit looser than some of these other purposes. But let's start with under what circumstances would we be doing strategic planning?
So most of the time, and we'll think about under what circumstances you do this and what does the human to data connection interface look like when you're doing that. So strategic planning is usually about evaluating your current initiatives and determining whether you want to do more or less or maybe none of the existing initiatives, and thinking about which initiatives are you not currently doing that you could be doing in order to further the organizational goals. So when you're evaluating that, the information that you use to determine whether your current initiatives are successful or not is based on the targets of those initiatives. And those are usually that all is based on like what you think is possible or what somebody in your organization thought was possible. So to a concrete example, we think that we're going to get 1,000 leads per month from our paid search campaigns and efforts. We're getting 700 of them. So when we do a month, and so when we do strategic planning, we go, all right, well, either we were wrong about our capability to get 1,000, or we've got performance problems related that we need to go back and rethink strategically, either our targeting or our messaging or our offer or the pricing or, all those sorts of things. You're thinking about, okay, what can we do to strategically change an existing effort? Sometimes it's the scenario where you go, we're running video ads and we think that means we're going to get X number of engaged visitors. We're going to get 100,000 engaged visitors a month, and we got 2. Like, okay, well, that's probably not a refine it sort of scenario. That's probably a kill it sort of scenario. So that's how you're evaluating your existing efforts. And in order to do that, the data that you need confident. It's probably a function of your scorecard and an ad hoc analysis interface. It's kind of like, this is the scenario, and this job is usually done with like 1 or 2 people. It's not a big brainstorming operation. It's usually done in preparation for a set of new initiatives, maybe on a quarterly basis, maybe a semi-annual basis. And you're thinking about what are the new initiatives. If you're doing that more frequently, then it probably means you've got organizational problems. If you're re-strategically planning every week, then you've got organizational issues. You can't execute a strategy to maturity, any strategy in a week. So that's how you look at the existing strategies, and the data that you need is like wide and varied. It's like, I want my notes. I want my notes from the things that we've learned over the last, 15 weekly meetings. I want my KPI dashboard so I can see where our trends have been. I want my ad hoc analysis stuff so I can dig into something and ask about the granular nature of one of those areas that I think is underperforming. Then you're also making a list of things that we're not doing that we could be doing. oh man, one of the things that we've really been stoked on doing is we want to build a lead magnet and we want to make a quiz and send people to the quiz. Your idea about doing something that you're not currently doing doesn't come from your own data. It comes from your experience about what other people are likely doing, and or your creative genius about something that you could do that you're not currently doing. And a lot of times that's just the FOMO sort of things that are like, well, I heard at a conference that some such and such competitors doing this thing and it's working really well. And like, so that's maybe one of the things that we should try in the next quarter. So your data doesn't even feed that part of the job to be done. So the job starts with you evaluating your current initiatives, and the job ends with you deciding what your next set of initiatives are. And that's kind of like, we were talking about this earlier, but I kind of imagine this as like the you use the example of the Beautiful Mind, the Russell Crowe in Beautiful Mind, where it's like the room with the strings connected and all the just a bunch of and like the setting and the lighting all matters. It's all about getting in your creative flow here. Like maybe there's substances that help you do whatever it is that you do in that space, but like you're thinking about how to get creative and problem solve, and so you need lots of things available to you. It's flexible and it's only half informed by data.
Yeah. So there's not really a like formula to this. It's more of a process. And that process is initiated, like you talked about at the beginning of this talking point, when there is strategic things that need to be done. And so your company might strategically think about things once a year. They might do it. I worked for a huge digital marketing agency, and I was the digital marketing manager of one team, in charge of one product line amidst 20 other people that had my same job title with different product lines. And every October, we would strategically plan what we thought was going to happen the next year. And so there's information you consume and some people you talk to. But ultimately, as the digital marketing manager, I was the one in charge of putting those projections and those kinds of things together. In other circumstances where, a company is either a startup or a start down, I'm going to call it, but a startup, there's a lot of positive vibes. You just don't have regularity because you're just starting. So you're doing a lot of the same stuff. You're thinking about like, where can we get traffic and how can we do this? And anytime you're whipping out a spreadsheet to be like, okay, if I get this many traffics and this costs me this much and the conversion rate is this, boom, we're going to be millionaires.
Yeah.
When you're having that kind of talk, you're in that strategic planning phase and you're using Excel, and that's fine. That's kind of how that stuff goes. The start down scenario is where the hair is on fire, the company's not doing very well. You may or may not know full story behind all the finances, but there's definitely the vibe that if we don't get more acquisition, leads, widgets, whatever it is, everyone's going to lose their jobs. And so you're still doing a lot of that strategic stuff. It's just there's a less happy tone around it, but it's the same flavor of activity where you're creatively thinking about these different things and creatively applying some historical norms that you might think are there. And then you brought up, Mike, about like industry norms and saying like, well, our e-com conversion rate is only 1%. And we just learned that the benchmark is 3. We need to figure out what's going on here. And we just talked to somebody on the other day on a call that was kind of in that scenario where it's a family run business. They've sold this stuff for 40 years, but just don't know much about how or why the digital side of it, what that performance should look like. And they're kind of trying to get more information to be able to strategically plan. And they came to us for some help on some of that strategic planning. But that's sort of the flavor of what you're doing in the strategic planning area.
Yeah, and we picked this one to come last because this goes best when the other jobs have been done well over time. When you have a good ad hoc analysis interface, it means that in the midst of planning, you can ask a question and get an answer. If you're trying to do strategic planning and you have a question that you've not asked before, and it's going to take you 3 weeks to get an answer, then tough luck. Like that's not, you're having a less productive strategic planning. If you've done a nice job monitoring over time, so you can see like when we made these decisions, this happened when we gave this person this extra budget, it worked or it didn't work, then you can think about like, what you can evaluate what's happened over time and use that to project in the future. If you've done a nice job reporting up to stakeholders and cataloging their questions and concerns back, then you can make sure that your strategic plans are in alignment with the business's overall objectives. So if those things have been done, those first 3 jobs have been done well, then this job goes a lot better. If those jobs haven't been done well, then this job is haphazard and incomplete, and the decision-making quality is probably not very good. And so that's why we picked it to come last. And part of it is just so creative. Part of it is it's not data. Part of it's creativity.
Yeah. It involves numbers, but it's creatively driven sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
So, cool. All right. Well, we started talking about this idea that you're sitting down to a 5-course meal and you're going to use your crab fork to eat all of this stuff, and how difficult and frustrating that would potentially be. And it's this idea that a lot of marketers sit down and are using one utensil report to serve multiple purposes, and all the frustrations that come along with that. We at AdMind believe there are 4 utensils in your data consumption diet, and they are KPI monitoring, ad hoc analysis, reporting to stakeholders, and strategic planning. And the context for which you're consuming data matters very much. Those are the 4 contexts that we have seen businesses approach their data. When you understand what those contexts are, it should inform how and where your data is coming from and what it looks like, so that your speed at getting that job done is efficient. Mike, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, the takeaway for me is, if you don't have a reporting to stakeholders process, a data process that solves that problem and that problem alone, an ad hoc analysis interface that solves that problem and that problem alone, and a KPI monitoring scorecard that solves that problem and that problem alone, then that's your job. That's what you got to do now, is you got to separate those 3 functions so that you don't cause that inefficiency in your organization and cause yourself extra work. Those are the 3 things you need. The strategic planning one, you'll use all of those 3 things and you'll keep records of it over time, but those are the 3 things. And they should come from the same underlying data sources. When you do this really well, that's like one data source that feeds 3 different reporting experiences. And so it's not like, oh man, how overwhelming is it to create this, because we're talking about so many different systems, and to answer those questions, we'd use these systems and answer. It's done really, really well when it's just filters and user interfaces on top of the same data set. That means everything's consistent as it reports up and down in those different circumstances. You're leveraging the same stuff, but that, to me, that's the job. If you're using a spork right now, or the crab fork, you need to get those 3 specific utensils in place to be used.
Awesome. All right. Well, we started out talking today about the reporting. If you find yourself in a spot where you're like, we need help, then obviously you can reach out to us. But our goal here in this podcast is to just talk through these things, give you a sense of what's possible, what's out there, hopefully open your mind a little bit to some of the things that you can do to improve. Of course, we'd love to help you with that. You can always reach out to us. If not, then we will catch you next time.